Hey guys, my name is Emma and today I've got my December wrap up for you, and this is also including my wrap up for the magical readathon winter feast that was happening. So it's been a long month, not gonna lie. At the beginning of the month feels like a century ago, so some of these books are a little bit hazy. According to my book journal, I read 16 books this month, which would make it on par with one of my best months of the year. Having said that, at least 6 of these are graphic novels, so that has massively helped the number. The first book that I did read this month was I finished off Mission by Patrick Tilley, which was actually one of the Dad's Challenge from November, so I've already talked about it and done a wrap up, and I will link that down below, so we're not going to worry about that book. Today I think I'm going to go in order of my favourite book from the month to my least favourite, rather than the order that I read them in. The last book I actually read of 2018 was one of my all-time favourites of the year, and that is The Golem and the Genie by Helen Wecker. So I finished this yesterday because it is the 1st of January today, just a peek behind the curtain as to when I'm filming all this stuff. This is a magical realism book set in New York in the very late 1800s, and it follows the story of a golem and a genie who meet. So for those of you who are not hot on your mythology, a golem is a creature created from clay which has a master that it blindly follows. They're humanoid in appearance, and they quite often will go on kind of violent rampages if they're not controlled properly. A genie, as it is spelt here, rather than genie as in from Aladdin, is a demon which does have a wide range of different magical abilities, and the particular fire demon in this book is a very powerful one. You get kind of different scales. If that rings a bell, it's because it also features heavily in Jonathan Stroud's Bartimaeus series. Both golems and genies are in that, and this book had a very similar feel to that one, but almost like the adult version. So basically what happens is the golem ends up without a master, and the genie finds himself in late 1800s New York, and it's about their attempts to try and deal with this new modern world that they've been thrown into. They find each other, they end up falling apart, and then they come back together for one big bad guy at the end. It's not the most revolutionary when it comes to plot. It really did follow a fairly standard format, but it was just absolutely beautiful. And I was talking to my sister about this actually when I was reading it. It had a kind of rhythm that reminded me of music. The sentence structure had a real lovely melody to it that really encouraged you to move on to the next sentence and to keep reading it, and it had just this real natural beat to it. And I think that's something which inadvertently I do look for in a book. Kind of looking back on some of my favourites from this year, they have that similar kind of cadence of rhythm from the words, and I think it is something which I unconsciously favour in a book. So it was really interesting to feel it a little bit stronger in this. I would heavily recommend this book. It was beautiful, and I really can't find a fault with it. It was such a wonderful magical experience, and this kind of book is the reason why I love reading. Like, this is what I'm looking for every time I open a new book. So beautiful, wonderful, perfection. Totally go and check it out. Another one that I read that I really enjoyed was V.E. Schwab's A Darker Shade of Magic. So this is book 1 of the London series, I think it's called, and it is again a magical world, far stronger magic than the one I just talked about, and it is a world, so there's multiple different Londons, and in Red London magic exists and is part of the infrastructure. In White London it is a tool for war, and in Grey London it doesn't exist anymore, and Black London has actually been consumed by magic several centuries ago, and you can't get to it anymore. And we follow the story of Kel, who is a magician from Red London who basically bounces between the worlds, trying to smooth over some diplomatic relations there, and it's just kind of his adventures. I really loved this book. I thought it was excellent fun. I loved the world building. I thought the characters were really strong. I love the idea of the different Londons. I think it's just a really fantastic example of magical realism. This is fairly well known. It pops up on BookTube all the time. It is book 1 of a series, and I don't know if it's a trilogy that's finished or if there just happen to be 3 books published yet, but I'm definitely going to continue. And then a lovely, really sweet book that I read was Catherine Rundell's Rooftoppers. So this is set in Paris, and it is middle grade book. It follows the story of a young girl who is on the search for her mother, and in doing so she stumbles across the Rooftoppers, who are children who live on the rooftops of Paris, and it is just Feast. Again, one of these like magical, wonderful books that sort of wraps you up in its own little blanket and really absorbs you into the world. I read this way back at the beginning of December, so I was still working in schools at the time, and when I was reading it, waiting outside of one of the halls where I teach in, as the kids were coming out, they clocked that I was reading it, and I had about 7 or 8 children coming over being like, I love that book, it's such a good book, miss, it's such a good book. So it has the seal of approval from many 10-year-olds that I know. It's middle grade, so of course it's very easy to read, but it did do the typical thing that a lot of children's books do, which it leaves the ending a little bit open to leave room for a sequel. It's really sweet and totally one to check out if you just want a light-hearted read. Let's talk about Magical Readathon. Let's roll through that, and then I've got some books at the end which I didn't particularly like. None of those were for the Magical Readathon, by the way. They were read either side of it. The Magical Readathon ran from the 17th to the 26th of December, and it was a Harry Potter themed readathon which had different pathways that you could follow to try and get to the Great Hall. So mine looked like this, and you could follow the different pathways which were different prompts. Now, I had a whole TBR that I'll tag down below, which I basically did not do because I fell really ill literally the first day of the readathon and spent most of it in bed, and then was on holiday with my family, and so reading wasn't really a high priority. I did technically complete it. I got to the Great Feast, but I did most of it with graphic novels, mainly just try and get through it. So let's roll through the path I took. The first prompt was finish your coursework, which was finish the book that you were currently reading, and that for me was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, I did this on audiobook, and I'm going to link it down below because it's part of the Monster collection done by Audible, which has Dr. Jekyll, Frankenstein and Dracula, and I've only listened to the first 2, not got to Dracula yet, but the narrators are amazing. Spoiler alert, Dr. Jekyll, we're coming up to that one in a second. I tried to read Frankenstein for part of the Spookathon a couple of months back and really struggled with it, but I do think that the audiobook format massively helped because the different voices really helped to kind of cement the story in my mind. The problem I have with Frankenstein and with a lot of books from this time period is they are epistolary novels which are told by somebody else, so they're either told in like diaries or letters, or it's somebody telling somebody else a story. So this one, we have a gentleman telling a story via letters to his sister, and within that story he tells his time of meeting Victor Frankenstein, who has created this monster, and Victor Frankenstein is telling the gentleman his story, and within Victor Frankenstein's story we meet the monster, who then at one point tells us his story of what has happened whilst he was away from Victor Frankenstein. So you actually end up with about 3 or 4 stories in one, and I started to find that very confusing in written form, but the audiobook did help to smooth that all out. It was okay. I can see why it's a classic. I know Mary Shelley completely revolutionised the Gothic novel, and she was so young when she did it, and she's a total badass and we absolutely love her. However, I found Victor Frankenstein one of the most irritating characters on the planet. Like, you've just made a freaky monster that is now terrorising and running around and you've lost it, and instead of like dealing with it and getting out of bed and going and sorting the problem that you made, you're just like lounging around having nervous episodic breakdowns. And I think this is a symptom of a lot of books from this time period, is people just seem to have nervous breakdowns left, right and centre, and I'm like, just get out of bed and do something. Like, this could just be me being very intolerant of that time period, but oh my god dude, you're the one who made the mess, go clean it up. So I found various aspects of Victor Frankenstein deeply frustrating, and that meant that when he was the main centre point I was starting to lose interest. I loved the monster, I loved the setup of the tale on the ship, I loved the ending, so I do think overall it's a really good book. Then I went and helped Hagrid decorate a Christmas tree, which was Read a Book with Gold Detailing, and that one was Adrian Tchaikovsky's The Tiger and the Wolf. This was a mission to get through. It is a bit of a beastie book. I think it's just under 600 pages long, and it is a story of a world which has shapeshifters. There are different clans who shapeshift into different animals, and then with that comes all sorts of lore and mythology for each clan, and then there's also an additional layer of lore and mythology for the northern clans and the southern clans. Now, if you're getting a little bit confused, don't worry, I was too, and that's my biggest issue with this book. It should have been wonderful. It should have been exactly up my street. We've got animals and shapeshifters and all sorts of exciting stuff, and there's magic, and it's just, it should be ticking my boxes. but we spent so much time on exposition and world building, I just felt like I was never going to get anywhere, and I was getting so confused with all the mythology that I was basically bored for a lot of it. Once the story did get underway and we had a little bit of character development, I was enjoying it, but then lo and behold, Adrian Tchaikovsky ruins it at the end by killing one of my favourite characters. I'm not going to say who, don't worry, I won't spoil it, but oh my god, I loved that person. Why did you get rid of them? This is book 1 of a trilogy, which I have no intention of finishing, because basically without that person, being very careful not to say their name or use any pronouns, without that person I've no interest in continuing with the series. If you are very into high fantasy and don't mind a lot of exposition at the beginning, you probably will enjoy this one, but for me, I like mine to be a little bit more integrated, and I don't need that much information about the mythology. It wasn't my cup of tea. So then we kind of go on my graphic novel binge. These were fairly randomly, arbitrarily assigned to the next few prompts. So I also completed the Finish a Book in a Day, a book on friendship, a building on the cover, and a book that you've been preparing for, all the graphic novels. So I'm just going to kind of roll through what I read. And basically I read the Captain America series from the Winter Soldier through the following 6 graphic novels. A couple of these were rereads, so I will point those out. So we had Captain America the Winter Soldier. This was a reread. I have read it before. This is where we find Bucky the Winter Soldier, all very dramatic, and is basically the one that the movie is based off of. Then we move on to Captain America Red Menace. This is just a continuation where the Punisher comes back. No, not the Punisher. Crossbones, sorry. They're very similar outfits. Crossbones comes back, starts to cause a bit of havoc. Steve is trying to track down the Winter Soldier and find out what's going on there. Then is technically the Civil War happens, and I read that one as well. That is somewhere in my house. I can't seem to spot it at the moment, but that is loosely like the movie, but not really, which is the big discussion between, and basically smackdown between Iron Man on one side and Captain America on the other, looking at basically should the government have control over what the superheroes do, or should they continue to act as free agents. And then there's also like a cloning issue going on under there. Really phenomenal story. And then we have Captain America, The Death of Captain America, the complete collection. This is the beastiest one of them all, and this, as the name suggests, follows dun dun dun, the death of Captain America and all of the chaos that ensues, including Bucky the Winter Soldier trying to track down who is to blame, Hydra and that whole taking over from S.H.I.E.L.D. thing, and also Bucky potentially taking on the mantle of Captain America. Then I finally got round to, those were all rereads by the way, and we now finally get to the bit where I was reading a new one, and that was Captain America, the man with the no face, or the man with two face. I'll put it here. This one I ended up getting on graphic novel through a platform called Cosmicology. I'll link everything down below, including I've got a video about my graphic novel collection and stuff like that, so I'll link that there. Finally got through that one, which then meant that I could continue the story, and we continue it to Captain America, The Road to Reborn. This is just looking at Sharon Carter trying to get revenge, who is Agent 13, who is in a relationship with Captain America in this particular storyline, and the Winter Soldier, who is now the new Captain America, trying to deal with the burden of carrying the shield. I have technically started the next one after this, which I think is just called Captain America Reborn. So this was Road to Reborn, and then the next one's Reborn. But again, I have it on ebook and I don't think I've finished it yet, and then there is another couple in the series that I haven't got to. So I think that's 6, but one long continuation of the same story. So that was pretty much what finished off the magical readathon for me. So woohoo, I did it! And I've just got 2 last books to talk to you about, which were ones I read before the readathon started. As I said when I was talking about Frankenstein, I did read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I did it on audiobook form. The audiobook was wonderful. It was narrated by Richard Armitage, who is the same guy who played Thorin in The Hobbit, all 3 movies clearly, and has just the most stunning voice. We're talking like caramel poured over gravel. It's just beautiful. I would totally recommend the entire collection. I've already said that, I will link it down below. It's quite a short story, like it is, I think it is classed as a short story or a novella. It's good fun. It does the typical thing that, again, half of it's told in letter form rather than actually experiencing it. And with something like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because it's now a classic, the big reveal about the fact that they're the same person is kind of moot point, because we already know that, which did mean that the build up to it is a lot less dramatic going in already knowing most of the storyline. I did really enjoy it though, and I would like to read more from Robert Louis Stevenson because I thought it was excellent. And then the final one that I finished was The Book of Dead Authors by Emmeline Reeve. This was probably the one that was the most disappointing. Oh no, it's not the last one. I forgot I did another audiobook. Oh, and I read that as well. Oh my god, I have more to talk to you about. How many did I read this month? Where even are those books? I'm quite sleepy, can you tell? Anyway, it's a murder mystery that is where an author, a killer is killing off a bunch of different authors, and it sort of plunges the literary world into panic. I didn't massively like this book. I felt the violence was too gratuitous, the plot was a little bit obvious, and there was a lot of discussions about like the purity of literary work and like what is considered valid literary works. The whole point was the killer was killing off people who wrote genre stuff or were ghost writers or things like that. It's elitism and snobbery that I don't think has a place anymore in the book world. It felt quite aged and dated. Looking at my book journal, I realised that I read 2 more books that I kind of forgot to mention, and I don't know where they've gone. One of them that I read was 15 Dogs by Alexis Andre. So this was on my winter TBR, and it tells the story of the gods Apollo and Hermes, who are having an argument about whether human beings are basically inherently suffer more because we are intelligent. So to test this, they give 15 dogs the gift of human intelligence, and then it's what ensues from there. It sounds like it's going to be a lot cuter than it actually was. It ended up being a really intense book in places, and it was one that I enjoyed, but I don't quite know how I feel about it still. It really immerses itself into that like dog mindset. So I mean, if you get kind of a comparison, like Black Beauty, whilst has elements of the horse life, it doesn't try and take on that horse mentality or think about what it would actually genuinely be like if a horse had human intelligence. It just kind of transplants a human brain into a horse essentially and kind of goes from there. Whereas 15 Dogs takes it far more literally and thinks through the process of gifting a dog consciousness and then what might ensue. So their ability to, they like develop their own language and how they understand that and how they understand their relationship with their masters. It's interesting, I'll definitely give it that. And the final one, the actual final one, is The Map of Salt and Stars by Jennifer I can't read my own handwriting. I'll put it here. Sorry, I'm really tired, guys. This one I did an audiobook, and it is 2 stories. It's a historical fiction, and it follows 2 women, one who is in modern day in Syria with all of the war going on and bombing and all that bad stuff, and then it also follows a young woman in kind of like 17th century, give or take, who is basically learning how to map make, and her journey as well. And the 2 sort of mirror each other, and there's like suggestions that they are vaguely related, and the modern day story knows the story of the older one. It's a very important book to exist, and it did have a really interesting look at what it is like to be in a country that is suffering from conflict at the time, and need to try and get to safety, and the idea of being a refugee and the travelling and the various dangers that are there was very, very powerful and very hard-hitting. And the historical fiction was very strong, but for some reason it just didn't really resonate with me. I mean, it was a very technically good book, and I think it's important that it exists, but I didn't really enjoy reading any of it or listening to any of it. It just didn't quite, and I wasn't really hooked or clicked with any of it personally. That's it from me. This was a bit of a confusing video. I'm sorry, I've just woken up from a nap and I really don't think I know where I am yet in the world. So that's what I remember. I hope you're having a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you guys soon. Bye.